Welcome everyone to this very special event. My name's Darryl Rigney. I'm a Professor and former Dean of Indigenous Strategy and Engagement at Flinders University, and I have the privilege of being your MC for the 12th annual Lowitja O'Donoghue Oration. Before we start this evening's proceedings, I need to cover some basic housekeeping. In the case of emergency, if we need to evacuate, please use your nearest emergency exit. So there's exits at the back and to my right. The assembly point is the Goodman Crescent Lawns, which is to the grassed area just next to the right of the building, on my right, sorry, the left of the building as you face it, and on the King William side road of the building. Toilets are located on either side of the front foyer entrance. For those who require toilets with ramp access, these are located in the Napier building. There are security guards at the front of the building who will guide you and provide access to that building. So having done those preliminaries, I would like to acknowledge Flinders University as a host of this evening's event, and the University of Adelaide for providing the venue. We have many special guests with us tonight, and I would like to specifically welcome some of those important guests. Of course, Auntie Dr. Lowitja O'Donoghue, AC, CBE, DSG, our orator for the evening, Mr. Noel Pearson, AO, His Excellency, the Honourable Hugh Van Lee, Governor of South Australia, the Honourable Stephen Marshall, Premier of South Australia, the Honourable Justice Martin Hinton, representing the Chief Justice of South Australia, the Honourable Kyan Ma, Shadow Minister for Aboriginal Affairs, representing the Leader of the Opposition, the Honourable Reverend Dr. Lynn Arnold, Chair of the Don Dunstan Foundation, Rear Admiral, the Honourable Kevin Scarce, former Governor of South Australia, now Chancellor of the University of Adelaide, Professor Colin Sterling, the Vice-Chancellor of Flinders University, Professor Peter Rathjen, Vice-Chancellor of the University of Adelaide, Archbishop Jeff Smith, Archbishop of the Anglican Diocese of Adelaide, the Honourable Mark Parnell, MLC, Parliamentary Leader for Greens South Australia. It's an extensive list and I've got some more to go. Francis Bedford, MP, Independent for Florey, the Honourable Christopher Sumner, AM, Jackie McGill and Stephen Arndt, our generous partners from BHP, Mr. Harry Miller, Commissioner for Aboriginal Engagement, Dr. Nikki Vincent, Equal Opportunity Commissioner, Nerida Saunders, Executive Director of the Aboriginal Affairs and Reconciliation Division of the Department of Premier and Cabinet, Dr. Roger Thomas, the Treaty Commissioner, Department of State Development, the Right Reverend Christopher McLeod, Assistant Bishop of the Anglican Diocese of Adelaide, Pat Anderson, Chairperson of the Lowitja Institute, and Romilly Mokak, CEO of the Lowitja Institute, Karen Bayliss, Chief Executive Dowan, Professor Peter Buckskin, Dean Aboriginal Engagement and Strategic Projects, Uni SA, Professor Shane Hearn, Dean of Indigenous Research and Education at the University of Adelaide, and particularly acknowledge Shane as last year's MC and thank him for that work, the Honourable Jay Weatherill, Member for Cheltenham, and that's the list. And there are many more distinguished guests in the room. Just if we go on a bit longer, we leave Noel no time to speak. I would now like to welcome to stage Uncle Lewis Yurakala Burka O'Brien, AO, to welcome us to country on behalf of the Kaurna Nation. As Uncle Lewis makes his way up to the stage, I want to acknowledge that Uncle Lewis was born at Point Pearce Mission on the York Peninsula, South Australia in 1930. Although born on Narungga country, Uncle Lewis, as we all know, for those who have spent time in South Australia and love him for his work with the Kaurna Nation and his wisdom, his knowledge, he embodies his own culture, and it's matched by a rare ability to locate Aboriginal philosophy in relation to Western ways of knowing. Education is valuable to Uncle Lewis. He has spent much of his life supporting Aboriginal knowledge leadership in an effort to change lives for the better. As a Kaurna elder, Uncle Lewis has provided decades of cultural and pastoral support for Aboriginal children and families, and this work has been complemented by substantial contributions to scholarly and creative domains, particularly with respect to the maintenance and promotion of Kaurna language and culture. His activities have been central to reinscribing a Kaurna presence in Adelaide and vital Aboriginal knowledge protocols and conceptualisations nationally. Today, he will welcome us to country in his usual style. Thank you, Uncle Lewis.
Marawitjanga, Kaurna Miana, no Wangani, Mani Nabundi Gani Atana. Nai Biriko, Mankalakala, Tandanya, Mianaku. Nature Yungandalia, Nature Yakanandalia, Padni Adlu Wadu. On behalf of the Kaurna people, I welcome you all to Kaurna country, and I do this ambassador of the Adelaide Plains people. My brothers, my sisters, let's walk together in harmony. There was a little girl drawing in a classroom, and the teacher went up to her and said, "What are you drawing, dear?" She said, "I'm drawing a picture of God." "Oh, my dear, we don't know what God looks like." The girl looked at her and said, "You will in a minute."
As an MC, this is always the most difficult part of the evening following Uncle Lewis. So this year marks the 12th Lowitja O'Donoghue Oration, which is one of the key events held as part of Reconciliation Week. This year's Oration also marks the first anniversary of the Uluru Statement from the Heart. This annual event honours the very resilient and influential Aboriginal leader, Dr. Lowitja O'Donoghue. Born at Indalkna, in the far northwest of South Australia, to a Piranjara mother and an Irish father, and gives voice to issues of equity and equality for Australia's First Peoples, known to many of us as Aunty Lowitja. Tonight we get to hear from Noel Pearson, who will deliver the main oration, and then we will conclude the evening by joining a community choir in singing freedom songs, and you'll find the words in your program, and we hope you join in. And I can tell you from past experience, it's an expectation of Aunty Lowitja's that people sing. So, and no lip syncing, doesn't count. So the advancement of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in higher education and life outcomes has been a part of the work. And public spirited leadership for all national interests is a priority area for Flinders. It's also a priority area for the partners who host tonight's events and sponsor it, and I would like to acknowledge those. The Don Dunstan Foundation, Flinders University, the University of Adelaide, Reconciliation South Australia, BHP Billiton, the Office of Indigenous Strategy and Engagement at Flinders, the Government of South Australia, and Mutrayalo of the University of Adelaide. Can we please give those people and those organisations a round of applause? So, before we get to Noel, I just want to take a moment to speak about Aunty Lowitja, Dr. Lowitja O'Donoghue. She's an Aboriginal woman who's dedicated her life to improving the welfare of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in this country. She's been named Australian of the Year twice and was the inaugural chairperson of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission. She was the first Aboriginal woman to be inducted into the Order of Australia and is a commander of the Order of the British Empire. She was made a Companion of the Order of Australia in 1999. Please join me, and that's just such a small part of what Aunty Lowitja has contributed. Please join me in a round of applause for Dr. Lowitja O'Donoghue and the 12th annual oration in her name. So now I would like to introduce our keynote speaker for the night, Noel Pearson. Noel comes from the Guga Yimara community of Hope Vale on southeastern Cape York Peninsula. Noel is a lawyer and a founder and director of strategy of the Cape York Partnership. Mr. Pearson also co-founded the Cape York Land Council and helped to establish the Upper, I hope I got that right, Health Council at Balcony, Cape York Development Corporation and Indigenous Enterprise Partnerships. He served as a member of the expert panel on constitutional recognition of Indigenous Australians and the Referendum Council. Please join me in welcoming Noel Pearson to the stage.
Good evening. I thank the Kaurna people for your kindness. I bring greetings from Cape York Peninsula to you and all our First Nations here tonight. I thank the Don Dunstan Foundation for giving me this privilege. I met Don when I was 23, when he visited my village in Cape York Peninsula. He was undertaking an inquiry of some sort and had a meeting with the local council, of which I was a member. I knew well his legacy as the most progressive politician this country has produced. particularly his appointment of one of my boyhood heroes, Pastor Sir Doug Nicholls. The great Yorta Yorta leader as governor of this state. My old school principal at Hopevale State School showed me biographies of Sir Doug and Charlie Perkins, A Bastard Like Me. And reading them from an early age, these great leaders loomed large in my life. Women and men of Adelaide and the young among us tonight, Lowitja should have been our 23rd Governor-General. She had the ballast for that post at that time in our history. Absent the presidency, it would have been fitting and right for her to have taken up the vice-regal role, with strong prescience of our eventual turn to a republic. Our country is susceptible to showering tokens upon indigenes to serve some goal of patronage and inclusivity, while keeping us out of the main game. But loath to accord to one such as Lowitja, the patron saint of twice as good, recognition of her true merit. Who today would not concede she was twice worthy as the ill-starred Hollingworth in 2001? This lost opportunity cost the country woe. To be sure, Lowitja needs no expression of regret about her contribution to public life. Her prodigious accomplishments and place in the firmament of Aboriginal and Australian leadership is undisputed. I just think our nation still needed her in her last phase of public life. She is our greatest leader of the modern era, the finale of which was her chairmanship of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission from its inception to the end of the Keating government in 1996. These were ATSIC's best years. They were years of great coherence in Indigenous affairs. Before the National Commission's egregious poor leadership played into the antipathetic hands of the Howard government. There were two ATSICs, one under Lowitja and the other after. It failed at the national level after Lowitja's term as chair expired, but it was always a force for good at the regional level. Without Lowitja's ATSIC, we would never have defended Eddie Mabo's great legacy and negotiated the Native Title Act and Indigenous Land Fund. Let me acknowledge the Kaurna people of this fine city and thank you for hosting us on your traditional homelands this evening. I especially thank you for providing a home for this lady, our leader, safeguarding her and giving her a place of rest and succour in the bosom of your ancestors. For she gave her all in the service of our people the continent over. In the twilight of a life spent in long, selfless service, I know I speak for all of us, whose gratitude flows brimming from our hearts in telling her we love and honour her so. It was my great privilege to witness her leadership of the Native Title Act negotiations with Paul Keating's government in 1993. Paul Keating's 2011 oration correctly identified Lowitja as our leader in that drama. She was the rock who steadied us in the storm. Resolute, scolding, warm and generous, courageous, steely, gracious and fair. She held the hardest leadership brief in the nation and performed it bravely and with distinction. Tonight I speak to the Uluru Statement from the heart, the culmination of First Nations dialogues on indigenous constitutional recognition of 2016 and 17 that led to the Uluru National Convention, issued at Mutijulu on May 26, 2017. The statement from the heart was an act of indigenous self-determination, the like of which this country has not seen in terms of its scope, rigour and inclusion. How can such diverse Indigenous peoples from all compass points of the country participate in a process and achieve that which everyone said would never be possible? Achieve a broad and real consensus. No consensus is real without dissent, but the dissent never detracted from the truth of Uluru's accord. I doubt that any polity in any community in this country has achieved the breadth of unanimity as our people achieved at Uluru. Uluru is the achievement of all of those Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander men and women who contributed on behalf of their people. It was led by two remarkable women, formed in the Lowitja mould, and worthy successors to her leadership. Professor Megan Davis, Cobble Cobble of Queensland, a constitutional lawyer from the University of New South Wales, designed the process and guided an expert legal team facilitating the dialogues that led to Uluru. Dr. Pat Anderson, Alyawara from the Northern Territory and chair of the Lowitja Institute, captained the dialogues as they wended their way around the continent. The work of Megan Davis and Pat Anderson was a tour de force. Leadership the like of which Lowitja showed in our time of need in the early 90s. I attended only 7 of the dialogues, and these women attended all 12. They carried the dialogues to their destination at Uluru. These 3 women from 3 different generations remind me of the stupendous quality and strength of our leadership women. Our respective achievements, I believe, would not have been possible without them. If self-determination means anything for the First Nations of Australia, then the process and outcome of Uluru is its very meaning. It is and will be a benchmark of hard work and rigour. Indeed, Uluru sets the model for future national conference, policy debate and decision-making, where we seek common ground on matters of high deliberation for us as Indigenous peoples. Let me turn to the words of the Uluru Statement. They bear reminder. We, gathered at the 2017 National Constitutional Convention, coming from all points of the southern sky, make this statement from the heart. Our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tribes were the first sovereign nations of the Australian continent and its adjacent islands, and possessed it under our own laws and customs. This our ancestors did according to the reckoning of our culture from the creation, according to the common law from time immemorial, and according to science more than 60,000 years ago. This sovereignty is a spiritual notion. The ancestral tie between the land, or Mother Nature, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who were born therefrom remain attached thereto and must one day return thither to be united with our ancestors. This link is the basis of the ownership of the soil, or better, of sovereignty. It has never been ceded or extinguished and coexists with the sovereignty of the Crown. How could it be otherwise? That peoples possessed a land for 60 millennia and this sacred link disappears from world history in merely the last 200 years? With substantive constitutional change and structural reform, we believe this ancient sovereignty can shine through as a fuller expression of Australia's nationhood. Proportionally, we are the most incarcerated people on the planet. We are not an innately criminal people. Our children are aliened from their families at unprecedented rates. This cannot be because we have no love for them. And our youth languish in detention in obscene numbers. They should be our hope for the future. These dimensions of our crisis tell plainly the structural nature of our problem. This is the torment of our powerlessness. We seek constitutional reforms to empower our people and take a rightful place in our own country. When we have power over our destiny, our children will flourish. They will walk in two worlds, and their culture will be a gift to their country. We call for the establishment of a First Nations voice enshrined in the Constitution. Makarrata is the culmination of our agenda, the coming together after a struggle. It captures our aspirations for a fair and truthful relationship with the people of Australia and a better future for our children based on justice and self-determination. We seek a Makarrata Commission to supervise a process of agreement-making between governments and First Nations and truth-telling about our history. In 1967, we were counted. In 2017, we seek to be heard. We leave base camp and start our trek across this vast country. We invite you to walk with us in a movement of the Australian people for a better future. Let me deal with the main elements of the statement. Uluru calls for a First Nations voice enshrined in the Constitution. The First Nations dialogues made clear the choice of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples to have substantive constitutional reform rather than mere symbolism. Remember, John Howard's symbolic preamble failed in the 1999 referendum. Paul Keating's view needs to be understood. He has asked why Indigenous constitutional reform advocates would want to be recognised in such a desultory colonial document. An enactment of the British Parliament, which is essentially a rule book governing our system of government and law. I understand Keating's characterisation of our Constitution, what former Chief Justice Murray Gleeson prefers to call our basic law. I agree, the Australian Constitution is not the place for symbolic words. It would be like putting some poetic flourish in front of the rules of cricket. The Keating aversion to the Constitution as an appropriate instrument for symbolic recognition coincides with the objection of constitutional conservatives who abjure symbolic words lest they give rise to unintended consequences in constitutional interpretation. The Constitution is the place for substantive rules, the establishment of institutions, and the distribution of power, which is why establishing the institution of an Indigenous voice is rightly done within it. The representation, functions, and powers of the voice would be established under parliamentary legislation. It would not be, as claimed, a third chamber of the Parliament, and would indeed sit outside of it. It could not have legal veto over Parliament's functioning, and all of its functions would be conferred by legislation of the Parliament. The voice would contribute to the national policy debate and seek to influence laws affecting Indigenous people. When power was allocated under the Federal Compact of 1901, First Nations were excluded. Yet there were more Indigenous peoples than Tasmanians. Even today there are more Indigenous peoples than Tasmanians. And yet, because the colonies were the historic parties to the Federal Compact, and the pre-existing polity of Indigenous peoples was ignored in the constitutional negotiations and excluded from it, 500,000 Tasmanians have 12 senators in the federal parliament. First Nations are a different polity to the former colonies. First Nations represent the sovereign peoples who possessed the country, since the first Australians made the crossing to this continent over 65,000 years ago. How could the First Nations not have a claim to a rightful place in this Commonwealth? The Voice is a modest institutional proposal that would nevertheless sit within our Commonwealth's most important law. It would therefore be highly symbolic and play an important function in our system of government, and so it should. Voice is power. Voice is recognition. Voice is empowerment. Indigenous voices need to be heard if the Indigenous future is to be better than the past. The voice must be enshrined in the Constitution. The Joint Parliamentary Committee, co-chaired by Liberal MP Julian Leeser and Labor Senator Patrick Dodson, gives us another chance at constitutional reform following the Turnbull government's rejection last year. I don't think there's any alternative to what recognition proposal should be adopted. The voice is the what. If the window of opportunity is to be seized, the Joint Parliamentary Committee will need to come up with a model of how a voice might be constituted that answers the objections raised by the government and the Prime Minister. Leeser has a strong view about upholding the Constitution, but he believes that you can do that whilst at the same time addressing the historic challenge we have for Indigenous recognition. The argument is made that the voice might have some kind of moral veto, that its presence and the advice it provides to the Parliament might oblige the Parliament to follow its every advice. One would hope such advice would be taken very seriously. That is why we want to create it. But at the same time, Parliament is a robust place, and Australian politics a very robust scene. I don't think I have ever seen Australian governments follow word for word what Aboriginal leaders have ever said in our history. And I don't think that's going to change in the future. First Nations will be involved in the national politics of the day. It will be a matter of how persuasive our arguments are as to whether the Parliament and governments will adopt them. And that is the way it should be. A second element Uluru calls for is a Makarrata Commission to supervise a process of agreement making between governments and First Nations. The Yolngu word Makarrata means coming together after a struggle. A Makarrata Commission could be an independent commission of inquiry or a tribunal like the Waitangi Tribunal in New Zealand. It would be an independent umpire body of balanced Indigenous and non-Indigenous membership, empowered to facilitate and mediate reconciliation, agreement-making and truth-telling between First Nations and Australian governments in an orderly and mutually respectful way. The Commission's function would be to supervise local and regional agreement-making between governments and First Nations, a process of local and regional treaty making under the terms of a national framework. The National Framework Treaty would provide the overarching terms within which substantive regional and local treaties would be settled. The third element Uluru calls for is truth-telling about our history. This proposal came out of the dialogues. It was not an option put forward in the consultation document produced by the Referendum Council, but the universal view was that we needed a process to tell the truth of our history. So the concept of the Makarrata Commission would include the function of truth-telling in relation to our national history, but as importantly, local and regional histories of the First Nations. When rereading Paul Keating's 2011 Oration, I found this apposite articulation of the crucial importance of truth. Keating said, "Above all that, I saw the approach of using the High Court's native title route as possessing an even greater attribute, and that was truth. There is, especially in public life, no more beautiful a characteristic than truth. Truth is of its essence liberating. It is possessed of no contrivance or conceit. It provides the only genuine basis for progress. By overturning the lie of terra nullius, the notion that at sovereignty the continent was possessed by no one, the High Court not only opened a route to indigenous land, it rang a bell which reminded us that our future could only be found in truth. Truth provides the only genuine basis for progress. This is why First Nations representatives called for truth-telling to be part of the Makarrata process. Finally, I want to turn to the concept of a declaration of Australia and the Australian people. The idea of a declaration outside of the Constitution, akin to the American Declaration of Independence, was first proposed by Julian Leeser and Damien Freeman in 2015. Such a declaration would have moral and cultural force rather than legal. It could be set out in an Act of Parliament, but it would not depend upon its legal enactment for its force. Its power would come from history, truth, and a people's pledge to the future. The Referendum Council's second recommendation proposed the extra-constitutional declaration. In their 2015 paper, Leeser and Freeman suggested that some form of national competition be undertaken to develop the words of the declaration. I want to propose some terms of reference for a declaration of Australia and the Australian people, and then suggest some language that may meet these terms. But before I do so, I want to talk about the looming opportunity for our country and the urgency of leadership posed by the 250th anniversary of Captain James Cook's 1770 voyage up the east coast of the continent. We can't just pull out the gurneys and start hosing the pigeon manure off the sundry desultory busts of the great captain from Botany Bay to Cooktown and expect the country to come to proper grips with its meaning for us in the 21st century. We can have a conflagration if we don't see what is before us. Or we can use the opportunity to transcend it. To my mind, the 250th anniversary of the voyage of James Cook provides us with the opportunity to do that which was not done in 1770. For us to treat with one another in relation to the 250-year-old question of finding a rightful place for an old Australia within the new. This we did not do in 1788, 1901, 1938, 1970, 1988, or 2001. And we left history unresolved. Let us not kick the can down the road again in 2020. Let us use Cook's 250th anniversary to commence a process of treaty between the First Nations of this country and the Commonwealth of Australia. We will need a voice to represent the First Nations in such a process. That is why a constitutional voice is imperative. Let me now set out some terms of reference for such a declaration. Firstly, it should bring together each of the three parts of the One Australia: its Indigenous heritage, its British institutions, and its multicultural migration. Secondly, it should honour each of these three parts in as fulsome a manner as we can muster. Thirdly, it must deal with the events at Sydney Cove in 1788 from two perspectives: from the perspective of invasion and from the perspective of settlement. Fourthly, it must honestly deal with the bad and the good of our history in as straightforward a way as we can. Fifthly, it should commit us to the stewardship of our land for future generations. Sixthly, it should commit us to making good on the Uluru Statement from the heart. Seventhly, it should set out our most characteristic values as Australians. Let me beg your indulgence in trying out some words tonight. Whereas three stories make Australia: the ancient Indigenous heritage, which is its foundation; the British institutions built upon it; and the adorning gift of multicultural migration. And whereas Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tribes were the First Nations of the Australian continent and its islands, possessed under ancient laws and customs according to the reckoning of culture from the creation, according to the common law from time immemorial, and according to science for more than 65 millennia. This is a spiritual notion. The ancestral tie between the land, or Mother Nature, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who were born therefrom remain attached thereto and must one day return thither to be united with their ancestors. We recognise and honour the First Nations who discovered Australia as their sovereign possession, the oldest continuing civilisation in the world. And whereas those who sailed the first fleet, landing at Sydney Cove, carried upon their shoulders the common law of England, when the sovereignty of the British Crown was proclaimed, the rule of law, parliamentary government, and the Australian English language have their provenance in Britain. From eyes on board ship, this was a settlement, and from eyes on shore, an invasion. We recognise the eve of the 25th and the dawn of the 26th January 1788 as a profound time for all of us, when ancient Australia became the new Australia. We recognise and honour the Britons and Irish, convict and free, who founded our institutional heritage, making our Commonwealth from 1901 a great democracy of the globe. And whereas peoples the earth over brought their multitude of cultural gifts to Australia, that we celebrate diversity and unity makes us a beacon unto the world. We recognise and honour our new Australians. When we renounced the White Australia policy, we made a better Commonwealth. We show that people with different roots can live together, that we can learn to read the image bank of others, that we can look across the frontiers of our differences without prejudice or illusion. Now, therefore, with earnest and open hearts and strong desire to fill the lacuna, after more than 2 centuries, we make this declaration of Australia and the Australian people to see our reflections in each other and recognise one and all. Our history is replete with shame and pride, failure and achievement, fear and love, cruelty and kindness, conflict and comity, mistake and brilliance, folly and glory. We will not shy from its truth. Our storylines entwine further each generation. We will ever strive to leave our country better for our children. We will honour the Uluru Statement from the heart and make good upon it. Whilst English is the shared language of our Commonwealth, mother tongues name the country and sing its songlines. And we do not want for them to pass from this land. They are part of the cultural and natural wonder of our country, that is the campfire of our national soul, and the pledge of care and custody we owe our ancestral dead and unborn descendants. After the battles of our frontier wars fell silent, diggers from the First Nations joined their settler and new Australian comrades in the crucibles of Gallipoli, the Western Front and Kokoda, and there distilled the essence of our values. That our mateship is and will always be our enduring bond. That freedom and the fair go are our abiding ethic. That our virtues of equality and irreverence give us courage to have a go. That we know we can and always will count on each other. 3 stories make us one, Australians.
And I thought Uncle Lewis was a hard act to follow. Noel, thank you for sharing your voice tonight. Thank you for the memory work, asking us to think about the matter of voice, power, decision-making, to consider the institutions that we build that are capable of delivering on the decisions that we make, and that those institutions reflect the values, beliefs of the people they represent. Following for the vision that you created, thinking about collaborative futures and how we build a future together. Following in the footprints of Dr. Lowitja O'Donoghue, I thank you for your own public-spirited leadership tonight and your own contribution to public life in Australia. Thank you very much, Noel. Can I now invite the Honourable Reverend Dr. Lynn Arnold, AO, former Premier, Chairperson, Board of Directors of the Don Dunstan Foundation, to the stage to give the vote of thanks to tonight's Speaker, Noel Pearson.
Well, Noel, thank you so much. You have given us so much to think about. You've given us so much to work through as we go on this journey together into the future. You have truly been an exceptional Lowitja O'Donoghue orator. Lowitja is the person who chooses the orator each year and has, without exception, always chosen a speaker, an orator, who will challenge us about what should be the way ahead. You spoke so wonderfully about Lowitja and her contribution over all these decades to the way in which Australia can truly become more Australian. And tonight you have, through your Uluru Statement 1 year on Oration, given us so much to think about, but precisely aimed at that topic of how three stories can become one. You have given by your oration authenticity to words that we often throw around in Australia. Words like mateship, like freedom, like fairness. But you have challenged us to think about how they can be made authentic words. You have also talked through the journey of the Uluru Statement and its elements, and I think helped give an understanding of the issues that we should be considering as we debate what is to happen in this country. You did make reference that no consensus is real without dissent, but you talked about the way in which the Uluru Statement was a remarkable breadth of unity that was achieved. But it has spoken now into an Australia where we have to work through how we deal with that dissent that is still there in this country. And you have challenged us to do that by not only looking at words, but looking at story, looking at truth, looking at what has really happened. A number of statements just stood out to me amongst the many notes that I've taken from your oration tonight. But they were important as defining the boundaries of how we consider the issue. You talked about the torment of our powerlessness, and you had done so in the context of identifying the coexisting sovereignty of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples with that of the Crown, and yet the torment of our powerlessness that has really been the situation up till now. You spoke about voice is power, voice is recognition, and that Indigenous voices need to be heard, and how that precisely should happen. But voice only has power to the extent that it speaks truth, and you spoke to us about that too. You said, truth is liberating. It is the only genuine basis for progress. And you gave us the example of such untruth that we have lived with in this country for so long, the idea of terra nullius. Today at lunch you addressed issues of Aboriginal economic empowerment at a Dunstan dialogue session. And one of the things you happened to talk about was a dreaming trail going up Queensland coast to Cape York, and how this walking trail could so easily bring in real recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures as it walks its way through. I felt that that was something we could consider in the Hyson Trail here in South Australia, but that's off to a digression. But I didn't realise when you said that this morning, or at lunchtime today, that you were holding in your mind another thought, and that was another trail, the 1770 trail of Botany Bay to Cooktown. And you have said that what we have now is an opportunity to do that which was not done in 1770, binding an old Australia to a new Australia. And you've reminded us today, nor was it done in 1788, nor was it done in 1901, nor was it done in 1938. It was partially done in 1968, but you said not in 1970 or 1988 or in 2000. And so you've challenged us to think about how that can happen now. And you talked about this so that the truth-telling can be understood not just from one's own perspective, but from the perspective of others. And I thought the way you put things so clearly brings that to perspective. Your phrase, your sentence, from eyes on board ship, this was a settlement. From eyes on shore, an invasion. And so you have helped us really think very clearly that the challenge ahead of us now is to understand that the eyes on board ship are not the ones that should define solely what is the future of this country. But you recognise that history is an intertwining of elements. And so in your reference, I hope that your draft that you gave us tonight is seriously taken into consideration by those who look at a declaration of Australia and the Australian people. You indicated that there are three elements here: the indigenous heritage, the British institutions, and the multicultural migration, which you refer to as an enduring gift. You have, as we know from your writings that we see regularly in the media and your speeches, a capacity to name the issue and to shake it up so that we don't allow ourselves to become comfortable with preconceptions that miss the point. You challenge us so often in that, and you have done so tonight. But your purpose in doing that has been proven tonight yet again, not by simply wanting to be an angry voice, but rather to be a building voice. Because clearly, as you said yourself, your vision is that our storylines entwine further each generation. I, as somebody who Lowitja asked to give this oration back in 2015, when I spoke about lingua nullius and the way in which mother tongues should be better involved in our country, was also much touched when you made reference to mother tongues name the country and sing its songlines. Noel Pearson, you have given an astounding oration tonight. We expected nothing less. But the power of your oration is not just in what you have done for us tonight, but you have given us points to ponder, but to act upon, because we are in this journey of entwining our futures together. Ladies and gentlemen, please join with me in thanking Noel Pearson.
Noel, could I ask you to join me up here on the stage? Could I ask you to join me up here on the stage? I'd like to make a presentation to you. Great. I just hope to give you the right one. Just got to make sure I give them the right one. Okay, Lowitja, I got the message. She knows what I'm going to do now, and she just sat down here. So. And Daryl Rigney, thank you for being such a wonderful MC of this event.
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you for your vote of thanks to Noel. On the behalf of the Don Dunstan Foundation, Flinders University, the University of Adelaide, and of course Dr. Lowitja O'Donoghue, after which this oration is named, we say thank you, Noel, for sharing your time, your wisdom and your thoughts. That ends the formal part of the evening, but remember, I reminded you earlier at the beginning of the evening that there is a part of the events of tonight that become the interactive part of the evening. And what I'd like to do is to welcome Mark Waters, State Manager for Reconciliation South Australia, to the stage to lead the Freedom Songs as part of our communal singing effort. One of the verses will be in Torres Strait language, in a nod to Eddie Peters, who is unable to be here with us tonight. Members of the audience, please join in or stand to participate in the moment. You'll find the words in your program, and I'll hand it over to Mark.
Thank you, Daryl. We sing this freedom song because Lowitja asks us to. We sing this freedom song because it was part of the movement, it was part of the freedom rides, it was part of the struggle. And so in singing We Shall Overcome and then its subsequent verse around black and white together, we actually commit to continue the struggle, to be part of the movement and to bring this declaration home in Australia. So you've got to do a few things. You've got to get on your feet. You've got to sing. A few people have got to join me up on stage and join Lowitja, and we shall sing We Shall Overcome.
truth shall make us free. The truth shall make us free. The truth shall make us free someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday.
You know that black and white photograph of the boat people, that was my boat, arriving in Darwin. Believe it or not.
One more duty to close off.
Couldn't believe it.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your company tonight. It's been an immense pleasure to have been your MC, and I encourage you all to join us for networking drinks at the rear of the hall. Thank you very much.